First of all, tell us about this letter that's growing in number from Democrats calling on President Biden to halt arms sales to Israel.
Well, Joe Biden has been coming under a lot of pressure in recent months from Democrats on Capitol Hill to condition aid to Israel, to try to use some leverage over Israel. This idea of leverage is something that the White House's National Security Council has pushed back on many times, but nevertheless, Democrats feel like Joe Biden needs to use his position with Israel in order to ensure that civilian lives in Gaza are protected. Now, this started in the Senate. We've heard these calls from various people, including progressive senators such as Elizabeth Warren. But now these calls, in the wake of this attack and this strike on these aid workers on Monday, have started to morph. And we are now seeing that these calls are coming from other parts of the House, including more House Democrats. And they are now calling for an entirety of stopping aid to Israel altogether. Now, the most high-profile person that signed this letter on Friday was Nancy Pelosi. She was the former Speaker of the House, a close ally to Biden as well. And what's really important and interesting here is that the other people who signed on to this are the more progressive and far left, as it were, members of the House. So it's no surprise they would call for this. But the fact that Nancy Pelosi has signed on to this shows that this really now is starting to gain some mainstream movement and momentum within the Democratic Party. And it's something that Joe Biden will likely hear as some kind of pressure. He's also now in a bit of a difficult situation because the Republicans on the right-hand side of the Congress are saying that he's abandoning Israel and moving away from Israel. Meanwhile, the Democrats are saying that he's not doing enough to protect civilian lives. So the White House really finding itself in a bit of a tightrope situation now, not just between Israel and the conflict, but also the Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill.
What's really interesting, Fraser, is you've got a situation now where I think latest approval ratings of Joe Biden have slipped again since December. You know, a lot of the tangible questions to those polled were about his approach to the conflict in Gaza and elections, as you know, as we constantly talk about coming up. So you have that on one side that's clearly President Biden is minded about. But you also have this relationship that was unwavering with Israel at the start of the conflict. Now these conditions in place. You know, how do you judge that relationship between those two leaders right now?
There seems to have been a bit of a sea change in the wake of this strike on these aid workers. Now, some pundits are saying that it's deplorable that it's taken over 30,000 lives in Gaza for nothing to happen, but then for the lives of 7 aid workers, for Western leaders to crystallize their positions on this. But it has been growing frustration for months between Netanyahu and Joe Biden. It's no secret that the two are not each other's biggest fans, and that Netanyahu tends to prefer Republican leaders of the US government as opposed to Democratic leaders. But they have known each other for a long time. But the calls are getting increasingly more fraught, and we are getting a bit more color on the call that we saw on Thursday in the wake of the attack on those aid workers. Axios was reporting that Joe Biden said to Netanyahu that if Israel doesn't change its course in Gaza and put in place these steps to protect humanitarian aid workers and civilians, that, quote, we won't be able to support you. That is a big difference in tone from that we've heard from the beginning of October in the wake of the attacks on Israel by Hamas. There was no kind of going into the detail of what that taking away of support would entail, whether that would be those weapons that some Democrats are calling for. But that is the starkest words that we've heard from Joe Biden about the support that the US can give to Israel. And ultimately, it feels at the moment that things are starting to get to a bit of a tipping point. And Joe Biden ultimately is saying enough is enough, and he can't really stand by anymore.
That is really interesting, Fraser, especially with Israeli press in the past couple of days, newspapers reporting how angry that phone call was. The one that's led to Ashdod crossing opening, the container port there, and also the Erez crossing, which was badly damaged in those October the 7th attacks. Fraser, great to talk to you. Fraser Jackson, our correspondent in Washington.